I got a call about the Genesis job in the early summer of 1996, around about May time. It was my brother's birthday, I remember that, and I was in the middle of making my breakfast, and the phone rang, and it was Tony Smith asking if I would audition with a view to replacing Phil in the band because he'd left.
Certainly by the time We Can't Dance came out and by the time we did the tour, I had no intention of leaving. That was still, I was getting more of me out on that album and that tour than ever before, so it was just the personal events that coloured the direction that I went in.
We sort of knew that Phil felt it was time to move on, I think, for him to do other stuff. So I think, as I've said before, and Tony has, I think looking back, I think it was great that Phil stayed that long. I think a lot of people who actually had that kind of solo career would want to move on, but I think he enjoyed, I'm sure he did, doing what we did. The writing process we have is still, I think, one of the most special things musically I've ever been involved with, and I think that was always there. But then it's time we've done it for a long time, it's time to move on, sort of thing.
My inclination was, let's call it a day, or let's see, who knows in 10 years' time, like now, in fact. He might sort of say, why not have a go again? But, we talked about it, and Mike particularly was quite keen. He said, well, let's just go in the studio, see what happens, Right, improvise, see what happens. So of course, we went to the studio, started improvising, oh, this sounds really good, I like this bit and stuff. But it was just the two of us, and we needed to get a singer. So that was the problem, really, trying to find a singer.
The initial reaction was wow, what a strange call to get, and what a strange situation to find myself in. I guess soon after that, I started to think about it and thought, is this really for me? I'm not really a big fan of Genesis. I don't really know all that much about them. Is it something I should be doing? And I'd also been recording or writing an album, the first album after Stiltskin's record, and I'd just finished it, so I was really quite passionate about what I'd been writing, and didn't want to stop. But of course, you're faced with, singing with one of the biggest bands in the world, or just carrying on in your kind of small career. And I think in hindsight, a big part of me wishes I'd carried on with my career.
Calling all stations. Can anybody tell me exactly where I am?
My favourite song on Calling All Stations has to be the title track. It just had an energy about it. It just sounded like an authentic Genesis song to me, and I sang it well. Really, really enjoy that song.
Yeah, I think the opening track was meant to be sort of something that's showed our the dark side, and it's that kind of melody really suits Ray's voice, I think.
It was like the Mama track on the album. Mama was always one of my favourite songs, and Calling All Stations for me had that same drama about it.
Dramatic kind of traditional Genesis, I suppose, in terms of the chords and the rhythm and everything about it. And then, vocal that's sort of, which is sort of, again, not rare for us, which doesn't really repeat all that much. Perhaps echoed slightly more earlier Genesis, this sort of feeling with Ray had a very dark voice, And I think towards the end of the song, it really lifts. It gets fantastic sound about it. I'd like to have lifted a little bit earlier on. I think that's my only feeling about that song. It needed to lift a little earlier. But it's still, I think, it's still sort of song I'm proud of. I think that works really well.
I remember with these songs, I'd sing them 2 or 3 times, and then Nick Davis would kind of comp it together, the best from each take. Calling All Stations, the last take I did, I seem to remember, was the one that just took everything I had. I was singing from the pits of my stomach, and singing that song live was a real challenge, a bit like Mama was for Phil. I think he sang that in the studio. It sounds amazing, but try reproducing that one live. It's hard, and Calling All Stations was like that for me.
One of my favourites was Shipwrecked. I think think we could have done it a lot better, actually, looking back, the way he recorded the backing track. But it's a very, very nice mood, and I like the title. He says, well, he wrote it. It's a nice title, Shipwrecked. I think if you had a producer, I mean, Nick's an engineer producer, Nick Davis, but had we had a producer who was more of a producer in terms of trying to get ideas and develop songs, we probably could have done a better version of that, I think.
It's a song again which started off with a little. I just did a sample of something Mike played, and then sort of did it and got this little riff which sounded really good, and then screwed it up to make this sort of very thin sound, and we sort of wrote the song around this riff. And I think it still sounds pretty good to me. That really.
It's an interesting song, but yeah, it's a good track, and it fitted the style, the way I sang, and you know, I made that song my own.
In musical terms, I think there's lots of good moments on this record. You know, I think it stands up very well.
I think the two things that I found hard really was the chemistry of that third person was not really replaced. I mean, Ray came in and did a very good job, but there wasn't a third person kind of between me and Tony to make us work. I think like Phil used to.
Probably a lot of it didn't it washed over me. It didn't go inside, you know, very easily, which is typical of Tony and Mike's material, I think. You see, this is where the three of us kind of had the best of all worlds, if you like, because, you know, I'm kind of pretty immediate. Tony's kind of a little bit, you may not know it at the moment, but you'll probably be singing this to yourself in a couple of weeks' time, you know. And then Mike is somewhere in the middle there. He'll write things that, not that immediate, but then, you know, I mean, it's just a kind of, it makes the things deeper. It makes the stuff deeper when you've got the three of us writing. And I could see that there wasn't much of that immediacy there, which means people had to invest their time in listening to it. And I don't think people wanted to. They either didn't want to, or unfortunately the timing was such that we were entering this soundbite stage of our lives, you know, where everything is now reduced to like the shortest possible time, because people, you know, if they don't like it, they'll turn it on to the next track. If they don't like it, they'll turn it on to the next track. The commitment that people had when they started buying our records, you know, just isn't there for most people.
I was very happy working with Mike and Tony. I thought, you know, the perfect gentlemen to work with, both very talented, you know, and it was, you know, I learned a lot working with them, the way they go about writing. So yeah, I enjoyed it. You know, I was always looking forward to writing the next album with them, because I felt we could have started the whole process together, rather than me coming in late on and throwing some ideas in there. I think if we'd started the whole process together, could be quite interesting.
People forget, you know, Pete left in 75, you know, that career was small, well, great fun, but small, whereas the next 30 years were sort of, 25 years were a big part of our career. You can't, the only way you can replace history is by giving more history, and that takes time.
I'd like to have worked with Ray on in a studio from the word go. It would have been interesting to try to write for that voice. So it would have been a different approach. And I mean, we did even consider the idea of perhaps you know, using both Nia and particularly Nia, I think, and Anthony Drennan as well. And I think he's a great guitarist. I really liked different kind of guitarist to what we've used in the past, but it's sort of a really, really lovely style. And the idea of, you know, using them a bit on the album as well, rather than, you know, sticking with just the three, would have been quite interesting to do. But you know, there comes a point sometimes you've got to sort of, the writing seemed to be on the wall, I think, and we just sort of read it and thought it's probably time to sort of just give it a bit of a break.